Hi, everyone. This is Phil Travis, and this is week 3 here at EOU. This is History 201, and this week we're going to be reading from our Eric Foner, our textbook, chapter 4 and 5. We're going to be examining particularly the 7 Years' War this week, and I'll talk a little bit more about that in just a minute. We're also going to be reading a couple of primary source documents relating to speeches by Chief Pontiac during the 7 Years' War, and also to the trial of John Peter Zinger, whose trial established certain precedents in terms of freedom of speech, freedom of press, that of course would be very influential in ideas that will be ingrained in the American system following the American Revolution. There's no test this week or quiz. We have a test next week, and I have posted for you a study guide for that test. You can take a look at that study guide, and it should be clear in terms of what to do with it. It has a number of terms in the study guide, and there are some bold-headed terms or items on the study guide that are potential identifications for the test. So these are ones you need to be able to give the who, what, when, where, why, the significance in a short paragraph. And again, that test is next week. So go ahead and download the study guide and work with it this week. So that you know next week you'll be super prepared for the test. So no quiz this week, no test this week, no paper or anything like that. Just the graded discussion forum as usual. And I'm pretty happy with what we've been doing in the discussion forum. The other part of the announcement I wanted to get everybody up to speed with, and a few of you have taken my classes before, you know about this. And this is the fun factoids, that the extra credit factoids that I like to do in these announcements. So the reason I use these video announcements is, one reason it kind of, I think, creates a greater connection between student and teacher in an online classroom. It also gives me the ability to help inform you about what's going on in the week, and also to to discuss small certain aspects of the history beyond, of course, the recorded lectures. And I, of course, have the recorded lectures up there this week. So have a look at my lecture for the week, of course, and lots of you do that, and I'm very happy to see that. So keep doing that. But these video announcements, the idea behind these is that I want you to engage the class. It's an online class, so I want you to engage the class and get an idea of what we're doing during the week early during the week, rather than like waiting towards the end of the week. I think it's generally better if we start thinking about the class at the beginning of the week. And so my goal with the announcements is these factoids, this little extra credit activity, is to encourage you to start thinking about and engaging the class at the beginning of the week. And so this is extra credit, and the way it works is this. In each announcement, I will provide a factoid. It could be a factoid you know, or hopefully sometimes it's a factoid you didn't know. And the factoid, you then take the factoid and provide a summary or a statement of the factoid, and you email it to me. And I receive the email, and I'll take your email. I won't necessarily say that I've got it. If you ask me a question, I'll reply to the question. Sometimes I'll say thank you, but not all the time. So don't always, just because you don't hear back from me does not mean I haven't got it. I check my email like all the time. So you'll email me the factoid no later than Wednesday by midnight, and then I will take it and I'll put it in a special folder. And then at the end of the term, I count them up, and you get 1 point for each factoid that you submit. And this point is added to a test score. If you do 6 of them, you get 6 points. If you do 5 of them, you get 5 points. If you do all 7 of them, I'll give you bonus points and give you a total of 10 points added to one of your exams at the end of the term. So if you do this factoid and you watch the announcements and email me every other factoid in the announcements from here to the end of the term, you will get 10 bonus points added to one of your tests at the end of the term. It's pretty significant. It winds up being the difference in basically about 3 points on your final grade. So you're talking about the difference between a C plus or a B minus, a B plus and an A minus and an a B minus and a B. So it can really help you out at the end of the term. And so all you have to do is watch these announcements before the end of the day on Wednesday. Watch them. Send me an email with a little statement of the or summary of the gist of the announcement, of the factoid. I'm sorry, not the whole announcement, just the factoid. And then I'll tabulate your point, and I'll put you in the little special folder in my email, and you'll get tabulated a bonus point that'll be counted up and added to one of your test scores at the end of the term. So it's kind of fun. It's an interesting way to, like, you know, just another way to, like, get involved in the history that we're talking about in the class, and also keep you guys connecting with the class through these videos. And generally, students really like this. So hopefully you guys dig it and have a good time with it. And sometimes some of the factoids you might not know. My hope is, and some of them will really surprise you. So this week's lesson, let me get to the factoid, but first, this week's lesson is on the 7 Years' War. And the 7 Years' War is really interesting, because the 7 Years' War, in a lot of respects, was almost a global war. We don't call it a world war, but in a lot of ways it sort of was. It involved conflicts on the high seas, particularly the Caribbean. It involved a major conflict on the European continent, particularly disputes between Prussia and Austria. And of course, in the United States, in the Americas, we call the war the French and Indian War, as it was primarily involving a colonial war between English colonists, French colonists, and on both sides, their Native American allies. And so the 7 Years' War is a really, really large, broad-ranging war, ranging from naval battles to continental war in Europe, with armies like the British Army. The British were allied with the Prussians, though the British Army doesn't really fight very much, if at all, in the 7 Years' War on the continent. The English largely focused on the fighting in the Americas, though they were allied with the Prussians and they aided and supplied the Prussians a lot, but the Prussians fought extensively. Of course, being on the continent of Europe, fought extensively on the continent of Europe. The French also fought on the continent of Europe during the 7 Years' War, and maybe one of the great advantages to the British was that the British tended to focus on, for example, their colonies like their North American colonies. And at the end of the war, ultimately, the war does run up a lot of debt for the British crown, but it is ultimately a large colonial victory for the British. The British seize, basically all of the French colonial possessions to the east of the Mississippi. It greatly expands British colonial territory in the Americas after the British come out of the 7 Years' War victorious. This is the factoid. George Washington. Okay, the factoid, George Washington, in the Americas, George Washington is very much at the center of the beginnings of the French and Indian War in the Americas, or the 7 Years' War. Because George Washington, so in 1753, George Washington was a major in the military. And Virginia, Washington, of course, was from Virginia. Washington's family, he's very young, but his family and a number of other very prominent Virginia families had claimed a lot of land in the area that today makes up parts of Ohio and western Pennsylvania. And this area, they claimed this area, but this area was being encroached upon by an expansive French empire in the Americas, or a French colonial empire in the Americas. And the French had increasingly, up through the Ohio River, from areas like Cincinnati, established a series of forts, not ports, a series of forts up along the Ohio River Valley, extending ultimately into western PA, as far as the nearby areas near Pittsburgh, with the establishment of Fort Duquesne. And this, of course, was an infringement on claims by Virginia families to lands that Virginia families, claimed that they had the right to. And so this led to the governor of Virginia, Governor Dinwiddie, to in 1753, in the winter of 1753, no less, to send Major George Washington on an expedition, basically, to go to Ohio country, to go to Fort Duquesne, and to present effectively a statement to the French there that, hey, you're on the property of British colonial settlers, and you need to leave effectively. Um, and Washington does this, and this is the factoid. Washington ultimately takes a letter from Dinwiddie and treks through like snow, cold winter through the Appalachian Mountains, up through the Alleghenies into this area of what was called Ohio country, and presents his demands. His demands are, of course, refused. The French leader there says, yeah, the French king has every right to this area, and George Washington then returns. George Washington's trek was ultimately some upwards of 2.5 months in the winter, in much of it being in the mountains, in upwards of 900 miles total. It was a real sort of frontiersman expedition. That area of the world was the West at the time for those colonial settlers in the British American colonies. Washington, of course, returns, and eventually in March 1754, Dinwiddie will send Washington back. And when Washington goes back, this is when the first violence really beginning what eventually will be called the 7 Years' War, the French and Indian War. This is when the first sort of American battles begin following Washington's expedition in March of 1754. So the factoid for this week is 1753, a 21-year-old Major, George Washington, is sent to Ohio country to issue demands from the governor of Virginia that the French colonial settlers are encroaching. Their building of forts were encroaching on their lands. And in the process, of course, Washington was refused. And in the process, Washington had ultimately he had led a relatively substantial group of individuals on a trek through the winter, much through the mountains, of over total 900 miles over 2.5 months in the winter of 1753 and 1754. And ultimately, this is, of course, going to spark the outbreak of the 7 Years' War when he's sent back in March. Okay, guys, I hope this is helpful, and email me that factoid. Just summarize it. You just give me the gist. It's not. I can ramble on sometimes, as you can see, because this is a long announcement. So I apologize for that. But email me a summary of that factoid, just a little statement of it, no later than by Wednesday by midnight, and get your extra bonus point. All right, guys. Thanks.